Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk through speech two, which is your persuasive speech that does require an audience. And I am going to share my screen just so we can look at the assignment together and talk through this a little bit. So I call this the do good persuasive speech, and do good in that I'm asking you to think somewhat locally. In psychology, there's a term called the zone of influence, meaning things that you have control over. There's lots in the world that we could worry about and that we could try to make change in, and we should. But there are certain topics that maybe are smaller and more local that we can actually have some influence on. And so I encourage you to think about first your own backyard, your own community, your own state, your own region of the country. I realize because this is an online class, perhaps some of you are not coming from, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. So wherever home is to you, I'd like you to think about topics that are of concern to you in your own backyard. So as you do that, as you brainstorm, you are thinking about what you would like to see done. I've done this activity with my in-person classes. My students in my writing classes are doing a persuasive essay right now, and we talk a bit about things like the condition of our roads in our community. We have severe winters and hot, humid summers, so the asphalt buckles and breaks, and it seems like just as soon as the weather gets nice, we are in construction season, which makes it frustrating to get around. We also talked about how we've seen an increase unhoused population in our community, and how it's been a topic of concern and discussion in the community for several years now. And so far, the solution has just meant moving people from encampment to encampment. So what does the long-term solution look like? So those are some examples of topics that might be more local. So before you branch out and branch big, I'd like you to think first about your own backyard, your own community. This is a 5 to 8 minute speech, so a bit longer than your first one. And so that means 4.5 to 8.5 minutes is what I'm looking for time-wise. It does require that you use at least 3 outside sources. Since this is a persuasive speech, your job is to try to maybe sway us to either think differently or do differently, or both. Persuasion is one of the hardest types of communication to do because most of us already have some pretty set ideas of how we feel, of what our beliefs are. So trying to get people to think or do differently is difficult. And so sometimes what you're aiming for is just planting that seed to get people thinking differently and to maybe someday do differently. There are 2 outlines that I'd like you to look at, and I'd like you to use one of them for this speech. There's one called the problem solution pattern, which does what it sounds like. The first part of the speech lays out the problem, the second part lays out the solution. And then there's the Monroe's motivated sequence pattern, which is a 5-step pattern that follows like a dissatisfy, gratify, visualize type of method. Both of these patterns, these organizational patterns, are geared specifically to having you deliver persuasively. So as you start to think about the topics that you would like to pursue, I'd like you to think about, again, your own connection to the topic. Why is it of importance to you? Maybe if it's not something that's personally affected you, it's something that has affected friends or family that you've seen people struggle through, that you could talk about and relate that experience to your audience. And as you do your research, I'd like you to keep your sources within the last 20 years, especially hot button topics. Things tend to change frequently. In the 16 years I've been teaching, the topic, for instance, about legalized marijuana has changed significantly. When I began teaching, it was illegal everywhere, and now many states have legalized it. And even in the state of Wisconsin, you can now purchase drinks that have THC in them at bars and restaurants. So that's a landscape that's constantly changing. You are, like with the last one, including your verbal citations in your speech. So you're telling us when and where you're using those outside sources. That increases your ethos or credibility, and it helps to add to the logos or the logic and evidence of your argument. And this is the one speech that does require that you have an audience. So I will have some materials on Blackboard talking about how to do that. If you have a kitchen table or some kind of table or even a living room setup, or you have somebody holding the camera, you pan your audience and then you show you presenting to that audience. That's usually the best. I've had students who maybe use a break room and have their coworkers sit around a table and they stand at the end of the table and present. So I need to be able to see your audience. I need to be able to see you presenting to your audience, and I need it to be at least 3 adults. You can have kids in the room, but kids are not going to give you the kind of feedback necessarily that an adult is. And since this is a college course, and in a college course, you would be speaking to a classroom of adult students, I want them to be the audience that you're presenting to. If you cannot arrange that audience, I have given you some options to present to me live on Zoom, which means I've given you a couple different sessions that you can log into. You would be presenting to me and presumably a couple other students who've signed up for that same time slot as well. I'm happy to do that. And I've always had a couple of students do that in previous classes. So that's something to consider. Start thinking about it now. Start asking friends and family. Start asking coworkers. Start carving out a time when you can do that, because it is the one speech that is required to have an audience. So please get to work on that and start thinking about who you want your audience to be. And if you don't have one, then look at when you can sign up to present to me. So that's a little bit about your persuasive speech. I hope that makes sense. I look forward to looking at your topics and thinking about how you're going to convince us of your position. All right, email if you have questions. Take care, everybody.